With over 150 episodes, I think it's fair to say I know a few things about you as my listener. You have a big heart, you care deeply about what you do, and the last thing you want to do is make a mistake. For this episode, we're talking about microaggressions, what they are, how they sound, how they impact our teams and leadership, and why we need to be more mindful of not doing them. Today, you will meet Carolina Reese. Carolina is the head of learning and development services for the ReadySet, a boutique diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy. Carolina and I talk about what microaggressions are, what it means for professionals to be fallible, and the importance of using preferred pronouns in the workplace to help build stronger communities. Let's get started. Hello, my friends. Welcome back. This is episode 156 of the Mid-Career GPS podcast. I'm your host, John Nerrill. I help mid-career professionals who feel stuck, undervalued, and underutilized show up to find a job they love or love the job they have using my proven 4-step formula. At the top of the episode, I mentioned how I know you don't want to make a mistake, especially when it comes to your career and figuring out what's next. So to help you, I've got a free career guide on my website. It's called 5 Mistakes Mid-Career Professionals Make and Need to Stop Doing, and I want you to have it. This guide highlights 5 career derailers, and I share why they will stall your progress to whatever is next for you in your career. To get your free career guide, all you need to do is visit my website, johnnerrill.com, for more information and download your free career guide today. My conversation with Carolina Reese is full of openness, directness, and most importantly, information. Talking about microaggressions isn't easy, but as you navigate your career path, knowing how microaggressions present themselves and where people are being microaggressive is an essential part of your leadership journey. And if you're struggling with why people use inclusive pronouns, I invite you to listen to why they are important. And it's also about being respectful. My guest, Carolina Reese, graduated from the Parsons School of Design with a degree in fashion design and has a BBA in International Finance and Marketing from the University of Miami and a Master of Arts in Art Education from the University of Florida. She brings over 20 years of experience across a number of industries, including finance, healthcare, education, fashion, and creative arts. With all those years under her belt, she's learned one thing: that we desperately need better middle managers. They build culture and can foster or ruin careers. Her goal is to create a kinder, more inclusive workplace. I am honored to bring this conversation to you, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Carolina Reese.
Hi, everybody. I am Carolina Reese. I am head of learning and development services at ReadySet, a boutique DEI consultancy. I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia, immigrated to the United States as a kid, currently based out of Nashville, Tennessee. What's brought me to DEI work has been 20 plus years of experience across a number of industries, including education, finance, healthcare, and other consulting. And, currently these days, I'm kind of on a mission to slow down and, enjoy life.
I think that's a great mission to have. And I will admit I'm trying to do that as well, though I'm not being very successful with it. So if you have any tips, we could share them as well for slowing down a little bit. But Carolina, I am honored to share the mic with you today because this conversation around DEI and specifically about microaggressions and how we can be more aware of them and what they are and how not to do them is really important, especially for everybody in the workplace, but specifically our conversation today related to mid-career professionals. In your career journey, especially in everything that you have done, what would you say is that mid-career or defining moment that really shaped or transitioned your career path to where you are now?
Wow, that's a great question. That I think is aptly related to DEI, weirdly enough. I didn't know this was a career path or work that people did. Um, as a job until I sort of landed here. I did DEI in other organizations, primarily like lots of us do as a consequence of bias and discrimination and microaggressions, on an everyday level. And so I think it took quite a pivot when I decided that I really kind of wanted to focus on this work, to take all of the just negative experiences that I had had and try and turn that into something positive and do something better for workplaces across the country.
You shared with me earlier that there have been some negative things that have happened to you in your career. Specifically, you shared with me that you were fired from a job after announcing you were pregnant. And I can't imagine how awful and horrifying and traumatic that was. But I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit with us today, if you're okay with that, just in terms of what what you learned from that whole experience and how that shapes your work a little bit more today.
hmm I mean, that rocked my world. I think in a lot of ways, this was, early 2000s. We weren't anywhere close to where we are today, and we still have a long way to go, like, don't get me wrong, but we weren't where we are today. And the narrative was a lot around, not talking about having a family for women, um, that being something that holds you back, that makes you seem as though you're not a team player. And I've always been somebody with a lot of grit. I felt I could, outwork the system. I could prove my value. Like, that kind of stuff won't happen to me. And sure enough, it did. And I talk about it in my workshops as a form of bias, right? We typically kind of hone in on race a lot of the time, but our social identity categories are pretty broad. So you can face discrimination based on gender, age, nationality, sexual preference, like all those things, right? So this happened to be, gender-based bias. And people kind of gasp, like, but that's illegal. And I'm like, yeah, but it still happens all the
Yeah.
time. Just because it's wrong doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Um, so yeah, I had to kind of fight back and launch a complaint with the EEOC, and they kind of started an investigation, and the employer ended up settling. So due to NDA, I can't disclose who they are or industry or anything like
Of
that, but
course.
the event did happen. Um, and that really changed something in me about the fairness that I thought was present in the American workforce. I'm Latin American. Things are different in South America, and I had this very idealistic view of the American workplace and just justice and fairness, and that was pretty naive, and that really rocked my world.
Thank you for sharing that. And what I particularly take away from that is what you said, that just because it's unfair doesn't mean it doesn't happen. As a gay man, there have been times in my career where I knew my job was at question or at risk because, oh my gosh, what if they find out? And I'd be like, look, the minute I start speaking, you're going to know. You're just gonna, right? I would try to diffuse it with humor in some way because I thought that would make the situation better. It didn't, right? There was still that kind of, oh my gosh, what happens? And then you don't have a job or you're at risk in some kind of way. And your point about how things are better, but we still have more to go is certainly well noted. And in a perfect world, everything is great and harmonious, and maybe someday we get there. But what I want to know from you specifically is when we talk about DEI and how we can be more aware of and in tune to the DEI initiatives and such in the workplace. I specifically wanted you to come on today to talk with me about microaggressions. So, to anchor this part of the conversation, please tell us what a microaggression is.
Happy to do so. So a microaggression, by definition, are actions or comments that remind people from underrepresented groups that they're different, typically in a negative way, right? They can happen really casually, very frequently, like they're pervasive. And often, I think this is where folks get tripped up a lot. They often happen without intending harm. You can think you're paying somebody a compliment and not realize that you've stepped into the territory of a microaggression. And there's really nothing micro about them. They're pretty devastating because they're so frequent in how they just normalize bias into our everyday interactions and just vernacular.
Can you give us an example of what a microaggression might sound like?
Sure. So one that we typically would give here would be, offering some kind of what you think is a compliment that otherizes or reinforces some sort of difference. So, one that's shocking but very, very common will be for people of color, particularly Black people, to be told that they're very eloquent.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll hear it that way. You'll have a Black person give a speech or say something in a meeting or, whatever it is, just being themselves at work, and somebody with this very kind of surprising look give this compliment of like, you're so eloquent. Would we say that to other folks?
Right.
Right. And when I teach these things, folks will kind of gasp. And I take a look, if it's, virtual or whatever the setting is, I'll take a look around the room, and white folks will typically gasp.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who would say such a thing? But inevitably I look around the room at the participants, folks of color, and they nod.
Yeah.
They nod because they've heard it.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned how it's that unintentional bias.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what I'm taking from you here is that the microaggressor thinks that they're paying somebody a compliment when in all actuality they're either spotlighting or highlighting a difference and calling it out that doesn't need to be. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So here's the big tip, right? The takeaway. Because what you'll get is sometimes a defensiveness of like, I don't understand why you're upset. Like, I literally just paid you a compliment. And this is where folks kind of fall down the rabbit hole of like, everyone's so sensitive. You can't say anything anymore, that kind of thing. And so what I offer folks as advice is it's what you're not saying. So if you feel pleasantly surprised at something someone has done, I'm going to ask you to stop yourself and just pause before you speak. And ask yourself why that is. Am I impressed because this person just has great public speaking skills or whatever it is? Or am I pleasantly surprised because deep down, the stereotype that I've bought into is that folks from this group wouldn't be eloquent. So they've pleasantly surprised me. They have not fit the mold of the stereotype that I've bought into. If that's the case, please do not give that compliment mm-hmm. because you're about to commit a microaggression.
Right. That's very clear and specific. And I thank you for sharing that. People who listen to the show, they're typically that mid-level career. We're talking about people at the manager to senior director type level. Obviously, we have people that are just starting their career and they're wanting to be fed with some great information. And we have other people who are at the executive level. But the one common thing that I know from hearing from my listeners and surveying them is that they very simply, they're afraid of making a mistake. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of saying something wrong that is going to unintentionally upset somebody. Now, I'm going to offer here that it doesn't entirely give them a pass. Right? There's a part where we need to be more aware and more educated and things. But what advice would you have for somebody who, let's say, wants to make sure they're doing the right thing, but at the same time doesn't want to come across as being offensive? Right? So we're talking maybe it's a virtual meeting or it's a check-in meeting or something of that nature. What advice can you give these leaders who want to do the right thing, but at the same time want to build and increase their awareness of where maybe their unconscious or unintentional biases are?
That's such a great question. And I hear that day in and day out. From a manager perspective, those folks, the risks are higher for them, right? When they make a mistake and can be very public, they can be seen as the face of the company. There's no shortage of manager instances that end up on Twitter or TikTok so they really feel that pressure, and they can feel such pressure that instead of risking saying the wrong thing, they don't say anything at all. And if we say nothing at all, nothing changes, right? So, I'm very, very open about the fact that this is a lifelong journey and that being fallible is a part of it, right? Even me, I'm a DEI practitioner. I do this for a living, day in and day out. I have stuck my foot in it. I have things that from my entire life that I need to unlearn, or that I didn't know, or, things like that. And so I often advise folks, the sooner they become more comfortable with the fact that they are going to make mistakes, the easier it is to normalize DEI conversations, the easier it is to acknowledge harm, apologize, rebuild trust, and move on. It doesn't have to be this whole shame and blame, canceling type thing. The best advice for folks that want to do better is to engage in learning, and to do so from people who write and create content about their lived experiences, right? So not folks that look like you, but folks that are from these communities, and are willing to share of their time and talent and experience. Invest in that kind of education, and that's how you learn to do better. And then when you mess up, because you will,
Right.
Try not to let your fight or flight kick in, all of the defensiveness. Just, acknowledge the harm, apologize, repair, and move on.
A few episodes back, in episode 153, I talked with a guest, Catherine McCord. She talked about breaking your ego defense. She talked something very similarly about this, about how we have that initial reaction of, I got to fight, you've offended me. And she offered some things around just trying to be more curious. Tell me a little more. What did you mean by that? Or tell me a little more about that. Or, hey, would you be open for a conversation here? Right?
Yeah. I think with regard, like, if you're talking to the person that you have just inadvertently offended, typically best practice is probably not to ask that person now to educate you on why what you said was offensive. They are dealing with enough emotional labor. And so, we want to make sure that we get, consent, depending on the relationship you have with that person. Curiosity is key to these things. So if you're, talking with a colleague or a trusted advisor, a friend, that's where you would lean in with that curiosity and say, I said this thing, it did not land right. It landed like a thud. I don't understand why that was wrong. I've heard that my whole life. What is that rooted in? I'd like to learn more.
I like that a lot. That's very, very helpful. Can microaggressions happen within the same group? In other words, can people of the same background be microaggressive toward each other?
Sure. We are complex individuals with, all kinds of intersectional social identities. So we might, let's say I'm in a group of all women, but even within that, there'll be some diversity of age and socioeconomic class and all kinds of other things. So, even within communities of color, I'm Latin, colorism is still very prevalent, alive, and kicking in our community, in the Latin community. So for sure, absolutely, microaggressions can happen with anybody.
Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about preferred pronouns. And I want to share with the listeners something we talked about before we actually started recording. So I was sharing with Carolina that my husband and I are avid Jeopardy watchers. And we were watching an episode, they crowned a new champion, and Ken Jennings said, and they are a Jeopardy champion. And I looked at Richard and I said, did you catch that? Because that's not something we would hear all the time, right? And so we've both done some education and work around preferred pronouns and what they mean and everything. And it was touching in a sense of, like, I immediately thought of how much went in the contestant interview or behind the scenes, or was it on his card? That we say the right things in the right moment to honor how somebody identifies themselves. But I do know that there are people out there who struggle. I can't think of a better word other than struggle, where they don't fully understand how someone can identify differently than a he, him, or she, her pronoun. In the workplace, where we are all legally bound to create safe spaces for everyone, what advice can you give us, or what information can you share with us specifically around how we can be better at using and honoring someone's inclusive pronouns, or preferred pronouns, I should say?
So I would say that, part of doing that is making it part of your everyday culture. So that includes having your pronouns on your Zoom, little photo. Mine are here, she, her, ella in Spanish, because I am Latin. And so that helps folks of the, Spanish speaking community. Having folks that present female and identify as she, her, revealing their pronouns makes it, and he, him, everybody doing so just makes it part of our everyday culture, which makes it less stark and different when somebody identifies as they, them, right? Because you get used to just sort of talking about it when you introduce yourself. We'll do that commonly on a call. Hi, I'm Carolina Reese. My pronouns are she, her, and ella, and I move on, right? Just the same way we say our name, right? Just kind of normalizing that. That said, people do struggle, particularly with they, them. And you hear all kinds of things. It's plural, it's, and it's not, right? If I told you that, FedEx delivered a package yesterday and I don't tell you the gender of the driver, you might say, oh, did they ring the doorbell? Did they leave a note? So, and that's one person. So we do use they, them in the singular all the time when we don't know the gender of the person in question, right, in conversation. So that's sort of been debunked and probably just a cover for discomfort at doing it. That said, there are people with really, really good intentions who just struggle, who have maybe never met somebody who's non-binary in their entire lives. Typically folks from, older generations. And so, you offer to practice, you lean in with that curiosity. What might be blocking you from doing this? Maybe let's set some time, half an hour over lunch, whatever it is, and let's practice. And that can really help and go a long way.
I appreciate what you said there about what's blocking you from doing this. It's a great question. It's a great coaching question as well, but it's just a great question to really get people to pause, to your comment earlier, and think about why they say that or they think that, and help them kind of process on their journey a little more about, hey, how can I help you with this? Right. It's really good.
Yeah. And maybe, it can be anything from, I've just never met somebody that used they, them. I'm not used to, it could be something just as, benign as that. But, particularly if you're kind of the trusted advisor and not the person in question, helping them practice just takes that emotional labor off your colleague to have to correct every time.
Mm-hmm.
There are other, kind of pieces of advice of correcting quickly and in the moment when you hear a pronoun misused. So if they say he, you can just quickly say they and move on. And for yourself, if you mess up, just quickly in the moment, correct and move on. You don't have to stop and make a big deal and bring more attention to your colleague than, they probably want, because they get enough of that probably already. So, just normalize correction.
And that is something I've heard people say before too, is that just normalize it, correct it, move on, not make a big deal about it. And just, right. You kind of, because it is about acknowledging the mistake, correcting it, and then, like you said, just move on to the meeting as it's going on, or the conversation in that regard. So you've made this very clear for everybody, and I appreciate that so much. We've talked about some different things here today, and just having your expertise and giving people some very tangible tips and ideas to work through is powerful. And I thank you for sharing that awareness and that education with us today. I would be remiss if I did not ask you about your greatest lesson that you learned at mid-career. And so just to go back, because for the listeners, I have the guests fill out a form beforehand just to give me some ideas and some talking points. And I'd love for you just to expand on this, because this I know will resonate with people listening. You said that your greatest lesson at mid-career was learning that people in positions of authority and power aren't necessarily there because they're the best qualified or the hardest worker, which means you're probably holding yourself back and deserve more. Tell us more about that, please.
Well, when you've kind of put in 20 plus years, like I have, you've seen a lot of things, right? You've seen a lot of folks elevated that you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense or feel right. Or, I'd love to say that my one instance with discrimination when I announced I was pregnant was the end of it, but it wasn't. And being a working mom and having a family has kind of followed me throughout, right? So I've just become more aware of the gender dynamics in the workplace. Who has more accessibility to power than others? How does the game work? That sort of thing. And you start to see at those higher levels, like not everybody's there because they worked hard. The good old boy network is alive and well, right? It's networking, it's hooking friends up from your alma mater or your business fraternity or, whatever it is. And so really one of the things that it taught me was that grit alone and hard work is super important, but alone isn't what gets you there. It is about amassing this village of support, this network of people that will hoist you, elevate you, celebrate you, get your name out, recommend you, introduce you to others. That really was a pivotal key to getting me to where I am now. I thought I could do it alone and that my hard work and my grit would just be recognized. I was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a village.
Yeah. I was wrong too. I was wrong too. And as a white gay male, being in certain situations where they thought I would just be part of the good old boys club and found out that I wasn't, got very awkward very quickly. And to your point too, I thought grit and determination and hard work were all going to speak for itself. And nope. Sometimes it really is, to your point. It takes a village, and aligning yourself with people who do elevate and support and champion and challenge and make you be better, definitely helps propel our careers forward. And so what I'll offer for people who are listening today is take some time to really think about who's in your corner, who's in your network, who is willing to go to bat for you, and who are you willing to go to bat for? And think about what kind of work you might need to do in your own networking opportunities. And to Carolina's point, build your village around that.
Absolutely. And it's not just about networking with people to get a job. It's about learning what people do. What are their communities like? What's the hard parts of their job? What are the rewarding parts? All of that curiosity, like you lean into curiosity with all different parts of your life, and that really helps. And then paying it forward. I never turn down a LinkedIn request from a new college graduate or somebody early in their career to just chat. I give them the half an hour and try and become a part of their village because it was so instrumental for me.
Well said. And what a great way to serve and give as well. So thank you. Thank you for that. Carolina, we need to start wrapping up here. So as we do, what advice would you give for someone to help them build their mid-career GPS?
Well, outside of what we just talked about,
Right.
that village, right? Also part of that village includes those professionals that can help you elevate your brand, how you present yourself, particularly when you're mid-career. You might be feeling stuck. You might be feeling at a point to pivot. So that includes professional resume writers. It includes career coaches, those people that help you see the gaps that, you've just been like working and pushing and that you're not seeing. So sometimes those are hefty financial investments, and I'm not, telling anybody to get into debt, but I am proof that they really, really do pay off. Don't be afraid to hire the help that's going to get you to that next level.
Thank you for that. Well, Carolina, I want to turn the mic over to you now. So if people want to connect with you, follow you, learn more about you and your work as a DEI facilitator and everything else you do, the mic is yours. So please share with us where people can connect and learn more from you.
Thanks, John. It's been such a pleasure. For those folks who want to connect outside of this recording, you can find me at thereadyset.co. I work at ReadySet, a boutique DEI consultancy. You can also find me at LinkedIn.
I will make sure all of that is in the show notes. Carolina Reese, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on the Mid-Career GPS podcast.
Thank you for having me.
My friends, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I hope it increased your awareness around the DEI initiatives we talked about today. You've learned a little bit more about what microaggressions are and how not to do them, but also how you can keep building your mid-career GPS and be the amazing professionals and leaders you are. So until next time, my friends, remember this. We build our mid-career GPS 1 mile or 1 step at a time, and how we show up matters. Make it a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening to the Mid-Career GPS podcast. Make sure to follow on your favorite listening platform. And if you have a moment, I'd love to hear your comments on Apple Podcasts. Visit johnnerrell.com for more information about how I can help you build your mid-career GPS, or how I can help you and your organization with your next workshop or public speaking event. Don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on social at John Nerrell Coaching. I look forward to being back with you next week. Until then, take care, and remember, how we show up matters.